know exactly what I was expecting going into this finale, but I know it wasn't this. I'm gonna try and start things off a little differently with a 90-second or less recap of the episode, so that I can spend most of this video going into a more in-depth review. So we start the episode with an undercover gun buy turned shootout at Bishop's hands. She's able to very dramatically kill 2 of the henchmen, but the leader gets away. They track down the dealer's house and find guns and NSA files under a poorly disguised floor grate. So poorly disguised, you might even argue that it was planted there. Meanwhile, Gibbs suspects that he and Marcy are being bugged during their secret serial killer hunting sessions, and lo and behold, they are. Later, the NSA investigates the leak and comes to the conclusion that it was Bishop herself who leaked the documents. At first, Bishop is really offended and is like, "How dare you accuse me of committing espionage?" Only to turn around 2 minutes later and be like, "Fair, I did commit espionage." The team interrogates one of the drug dealers and tries to get him to admit to framing Bishop, but he violently denies it, leading them to believe that Bishop was in fact the one who leaked the documents. Torres then tracks Bishop down to the office, where she admits that she's been working alongside Odette, and Odette was the one who planted the documents in the grate in the first place. Now, Bishop is off to fight crime in a place that requires her to be a disgraced former agent, cut off from everyone else. Bishop and Torres finally kiss, and then she leaves. Does that put a damper on the kiss? A little bit, yeah, actually. Finally, Gibbs takes the boat he's been working on all episode off to sea, perhaps part of his plan with Marcy, and he's pretty much immediately blown up. But at the very last minute, he swims away from the wreckage. And that is Rule 91. Let's talk about it. First, I am going to dive into some of my main criticisms with the episode, but if you're someone who really enjoyed this episode, or you're looking for things to enjoy about this episode, I will be talking about things I really liked about the finale later on. So as this episode was wrapping up, I felt like they were really only left with 2 options for Bishop moving forward, and that was either to do 20 years in jail or live the rest of her life in hiding. And neither of those felt like returning as main character vibes. So it did make sense when later that night, Emily Wickersham went on Instagram and confirmed that she would be leaving NCIS. She didn't specify whether or not she'd be back for like the premiere arc or anything like that. And I don't think it's impossible, but just based on the language that she was using in that post, it doesn't feel super likely to me right now, but that might change. In theory, I don't really hate like an agent gone rogue storyline for Bishop. I am kind of like a sucker for big transformational arcs, as I'm sure you can tell. But with an arc like that, I feel like that's something you have to write a really strong lead up to in order to drive the character to that point. I feel like a lot of Bishop's transformation was really just based on physical things that we were seeing, like her training more, her becoming a better shooter, her taking more karate classes. Like, it very rarely reached below that level, and I do think that ultimately ended up hurting this arc. I think I've mentioned this before, but as the show progressed, I feel like Bishop seemed to becoming more and more like Gibbs, which makes sense as to why she would keep going to him for answers to her questions. Like, was it worth it standing up for what you thought was right, but losing your place on the team in the process? But my kind of issue with this parallel is that I don't really know exactly what Bishop thought was worth losing the team over. Do you know what I mean? With Gibbs, I think a lot of his stepping back has to do with all of these insane personal atrocities that he's witnessed in his own personal life and how he keeps seeing the system fail him and his friends and his family over and over again. I just don't feel like that was quite as built up for Bishop. Like, I don't fully understand what was driving her to this really, really extreme point, as much as I would with Gibbs. I do think that the seeds of this storyline existed prior to this finale. Like I said, she was becoming a better fighter, she was training harder. We saw her look at flights to Bolivia and like doing these kind of off things that were out of character for Bishop. I just think that was a little bit too disproportionate to the emotional aspects of all of this. Like, what was weighing so heavily on her that she felt the need to step away from NCIS, to step away from the team, from these people that are like family to her and maybe even a little bit more? Bishop also keeps having all these conversations with Gibbs about how unfair it is that he keeps him in the dark and how he really needs to apologize to the team. But those conversations kind of feel nullified by the end of the episode when Bishop turns around and does the same thing, but like kind of worse. I'm also not going to pretend like I have the perfect answer to this whole arc. I think the writers had a very difficult season on their hand, and I think they had to write in a lot of things that were out of their control. Unfortunately, I think this would have been a very time-consuming arc to perfect, and I don't think this shortened season allowed for some of that time they might have needed. You know, sometimes I do wonder if we should have just bit the bullet and scrapped the Canadian drug dealing arc. I do wonder if that maybe would have fixed some problems.
Was it worth losing? Us?
I don't know.
One loose end that this finale did tie up for me. I always thought it was a little weird how viciously Bishop had Ziva's back when she was accused of espionage. It's because she thought they were going to be cellmates. Speaking of Ziva, she says for the 1000th time, Ziva and Bishop ultimately had their lives kind of go in opposite trajectories. I'm so curious how that would weigh on Ziva's mind, especially because without her, Bishop and Odette likely would have never met. I think there's a really deep conversation within this about the choices that they've both made. The odds that we'll eventually see this conversation are probably slim to none, but God, I would love to see it anyway. The more I think about it, the more potential I think this had to be like an incredible, incredible character arc, which is why it's like kind of twice as devastating to me that her exit wasn't as strong as I think it really could have been. How deeply was Odette involved in this, by the way? Why did Odette feel the need to plant the documents now of all times? Like, did Bishop have a conversation with Odette that her and Nick were getting much closer, and maybe Odette felt that that was endangering her ties to the mission or to whatever organization she plans on ultimately joining? Because we do know that Bishop told Odette at least something about Nick, which is like, but also like, oh God, is that what caused her to plant the documents and have Bishop ultimately leave? Speaking of Torres, oh God, oh no. Torres has such a history of trust issues that I'm sure something like this is just obliterating right now. I also do think that her final conversation with him was strangely cold. And I think some of that might have been to just kind of try and ice him out and cut him off. And I think that was trying to reduce pain for both of them, at least in her mind. I don't know if it worked. It felt maybe twice as painful as it could have. That whole, like, I have nothing to be sorry about felt brutal. I liked him telling her that that feeling was going to wear off because he's been in a similar situation before. In a tragic twist of fate, this conversation they had pointed me to even more reasons why they could have been a really strong couple just based on the pasts that both of them have dealt with. And to see it end like this, at least for now, was really kind of tough. McGee. God, I feel bad for McGee. He has just seen so many loved ones come and go for a variety of like heartbreaking reasons, and it seems to be really weighing on him now. His whole attitude this episode was just kind of shut down, get through it, we'll deal with it later, which I think is this really powerful defense mechanism he's built up over the past 18 years. I'm really crossing my fingers that this is something we delve more into moving forward, especially if this coming season is a full season, which I'm imagining it would be. I also do kind of want to take a second to address the elephant in the room. We've lost so many, so many female characters. I think almost every guy character on NCIS is either single or widowed. We're in the Golden Girls timeline now. One of the reasons that I was upset about Sloane leaving is because I felt like the show finally had a matriarch, which is something that's been absent for a really long time. I just don't know how we're supposed to have a matriarch if every single female character on the show either leaves or is killed off by the ripe old age of 35. And I completely understand if actors want to move on from the show, because ultimately this is just a job for them. It's not their real life, and I so very much respect if they want to move forward with their career. However, I do think it is important to take note of how the characters are written off, or why they're written off, or what their character then goes on to do within the story of the show. It's not my favorite choice when certain characters' exits are written in a way that mostly just fuels other characters' storylines. I do kind of feel like, you know, with Brina being written off, or Emily being written off, I do feel like that was to give us a really heartfelt Jimmy Palmer scene, or to give us a really heartbreaking scene for Fornell. As much as I really enjoy those characters and I like that they had these really nice scenes, I do kind of wish that those characters were still around. even if they had to be like recast or something, like I feel like there was more to offer there beyond them just being killed off. Fornell had his wife and his daughter killed. Gibbs had his wife and daughter killed. Jimmy had his wife killed. Vance had his wife killed. Tony originally kind of had his wife killed. Even friggin' Eli had his wife and children killed. Senior had his wife die tragically young. Like, what's happening? What's going on? Delilah, you better count your fucking days, girlfriend. I just feel like we've rapidly lost a really rich pool of female characters. And for some of them, I just feel like their deaths were just kind of written as like a one-shot, and I don't love that. I feel like the character was worth more than their death, if that makes sense. I think there's value in discussing how any significant character was written off. I think that's always worthwhile. My primary focus is just kind of on the female characters for now, because I feel like they've been dropping like flies recently. I also do really appreciate that Bishop's exit storyline heavily focused on Bishop and wasn't too focused on other people's opinions or viewpoints on her exit. I like that it was very Bishop focused. However, I do think there is a middle ground between leaving for your man and espionage. Now, time to discuss things that I really enjoyed about the episode. I do really like Jessica Knight so far. I like her character a lot. I especially like her relationship with Jimmy Palmer. It was really nice to see how the two of them like vibed with each other. I think right now they're testing what works, testing what doesn't work, and then taking bits and pieces of that to hopefully build a really strong, cool character. McGee, like I said, I really liked that you could read some of that inner turmoil with McGee in this episode and how heavily things were starting to weigh on him. I feel like that's something we can't continue to ignore for McGee's sake. I really do like that they let Bishop be the primary focus of Bishop's exit. Like I discussed in length, I wish it had been built up differently, but I really kind of dig that they gave her this kind of insane, weighty arc on her way out. I do wonder how things would have played out differently if they had advertised that it was her final episode versus how they did it, which was really no forewarning. Maybe this is a hot take. I do kind of like that they're trying out surprising the audience a little bit more. I am really interested to see if the boat blowing up was part of Gibbs and Marcy's plan. I'm thinking it might have been. One, because Gibbs is omniscient and is always 25 steps ahead of all of us. Two, because they had a big conversation earlier in the episode in regards to the body and water and sailing and how that would have affected things for the serial killer. If not, I'm sure that was a really rough day for Gibbs. Either way, I do feel sad that the boat was blown up because I feel like he spent a lot of time on that. Looking ahead, the team is looking awfully small for next year, especially if Gibbs only comes back part-time, which is kind of the rumor right now. I am theorizing right now that would either mean McGee is offered the leadership role and takes it, or that the leadership role is offered to someone else. McGee gets really upset, it turns into like a whole conflict arc, and then he ultimately maybe leaves himself. Either way, that's only leaving 3 people on the team. McGee, or a different leader, Torres, and Katrina Law. Presumably, if Katrina Law doesn't come back, we are in trouble. This is especially kind of funny to me because just a few seasons ago, we had so many team members that we had to start adding desks. And now we have to like dig into the reserves. What's happening? How have we gotten here? NCIS is also moving to Monday nights for the first time. I think that's to pair with the new NCIS Hawaii series. I am curious to see how things play out with this new time slot and how that affects things moving forward. Please let me know your thoughts, either what you liked about this episode or how you maybe wish things would have played out differently. Also, where you think we're going next season, because I think things are going to be really shaken up when we return, and I'm really curious to see how the characters react to that, and I know you probably are as well. I just realized I didn't even discuss the whole idea of Rule 91 or like that final conversation Bishop and Gibbs had, and I think that's maybe because I don't fully know how I feel about it yet. I think this is a finale that I'm going to be digesting and thinking through for a long time. I also feel like I can't really wrap up this review without thanking Emily Wickersham for all of her time on the show. It may have taken me a moment, but I really do love Bishop's character, and I think she's been such an asset to the show over the past, God, like 9 seasons? time is fleeting. I have a feeling she's going to go on to do really incredible projects, and I am very excited to support them. Thank you guys for tagging along on this really crazy season with me, and I can't wait to read your thoughts below.